Hey everybody, back at you with another really weird Google Earth video. I know you're excited. So am I. Actually, this took a little while to record because I just couldn't get, the gumption to hit record and also the opportunity to record these things. It's a little easier, in this case, ironically, to edit than record. But anyway, so as per our last episode, I was tracking these weird lines that we find all over the ocean floor. And so, a little bit of research further, and it turns out that these lines are actually ship sensors, a combination of sonar and also advanced gravimetric sensors that are dragged along the bottom of these ships. So these are actually showing because the distribution of mass on the landscape changes the warping of gravity, and that results in a slightly different shape to time itself. Because of Einstein's theory of relativity, gravity is basically a warp in space-time, and a warp in space-time results in gravity changes. So the changes in density, changes in the surface, those all result in gravimetric changes. And so these can detect these. So effectively, I could have stopped right there. There's nothing weird about this. Lots of people have stopped there and just didn't really look any further into it. But I thought, hey, these are going to some interesting features. There's a reason these ships are moving to these locations and areas. A lot of people are putting a lot of money into finding these things. So effectively what it is a map of human ports, cities, population centers, which are also dependent on ideal conditions, climate, geology, materials, natural resources, and other reasons too. There's different legends and stuff about also the foundations of all sorts of different places, if you really look into it. And so places are, you could really get lost in the number of different magic places there are in the world. And as you can see, I sort of did a little bit. But honestly, this is just the tracing of some of these lines. Even after I found out that there are these linkages between human locations and geologically interesting and possibly magnetically or gravitationally interesting features, that this is kind of a hybrid, call it a multidimensional map between the different points on the Earth that are of great interest to people, and also that are of great interest to people geologically, and of great interest to just the Earth. So places that have a lot of geological activity, geomagnetic activity, also happen to be a lot of places with a lot of interesting biodiversity, changes in the landforms, the divisions in the landforms and areas of the land. Actually, according to Darwin, what creates a lot of the origin of the species, where those divisions create barriers that separate populations and so forth. So, in a manner of speaking, it's kind of a map of the evolution of life, the geology of our planet, and the human species. So multidimensional is an appropriate word for it. Not necessarily in the string theory sense. I was talking to the robot. I was talking to Chat GPT about this, and I'll let you know what it said. And I wanted to get into this. So I said, please explain how a higher dimensional geometry, such as a manifold, this is in the string theory sense, could affect this four-dimensional spacetime. It gives the answer per string theory, that higher dimensional geometries can indeed have profound implications for our understanding of the four-dimensional space-time that we live in. Here's a simplified explanation. First, understand what meant by a manifold. In mathematics, a manifold is a topological space. I think that means form. That is a form with a surface that is locally similar to Euclidean space. I think that means traditional space, like in a Newtonian or geometric sense. Forgive me, I'm learning too. In simpler terms, this means that if you zoom in close enough to any point on a manifold that's supposedly a higher dimensional geometric structure, it looks just like ordinary space, but when you zoom out, you can see it might have more complex, non-Euclidean structure. That surface of a sphere, for example, is a two-dimensional manifold. So, in the application of this thing we're doing, it's a two-dimensional map that is imposed on a three-dimensional sphere. So, again, here we have the fusion of dimensions of space. Now, what we're dealing with is different dimensions of quality. You could think of a dimension as any given measurement, and some are fusions of lower dimensions that compose them too. So yeah, this is where it's talking about whether or not there could be more than four dimensions, which we really still haven't totally proven yet. I'm not completely sold on the existence of higher dimensions of space and time. I wonder if if we can fit some of the qualities we would ascribe to higher dimensions mathematically into physical spaces here, or as we're talking about other kind of unseen dimensions that are maybe composed of other dimensions, like temperature, for example, is composed of frequency, space, time, matter, a lot of different things. So, but you can measure it, and therefore it's a dimension in a sense. So I wanted to study cymatics. We're talking about cymatics basically, which is typically thought of as like a acoustic resonant phenomena, but it's not necessarily limited to that. Kind of getting it mixed up here. It's where you put some rice on a table or something like that, and play a sound into it, and it organizes itself into these kind of resonant forms. And there's examples of this in nature. Certain resonant tones create these more and more successfully more complex sort of shapes and geometry. And these are the imposition of a 3D resonant sort of standing wave that comes from the harmonies of the molecules, and that energy shape, which is a higher dimensional shape, is being imposed on this 2 or 3D surface, which is, again, it's all dimensions, frequencies. So here's an example, and I think this is legal because this. Oops, hold on. I just realized I don't think I have my desktop sound going, so here we go.
Chladni discovered that when he spread sand on metal plates and then vibrated the plates with a violin bow, the sand arranged itself into patterns. Different geometrical forms appeared depending on the vibration produced.
Now, if you think in terms of like this is like flatland. This is a two-dimensional surface, And if you can imagine the three-dimensional shape that's moving through it, that's of successively more divisions to that shape, kind of like cells in that shape, depending on the frequency, and that 3D shape, if you can see it moving through your mind's eye. So let's go back to our little mappy map here. I haven't completely lost you yet. And so I drew these around the planet. And some of these are actually on stronger lines than just these. You can tell that these perfectly straight ones, that's, where a ship moved through. A lot of them cross in Los Angeles and stuff. But, starting from places just on the ocean, they end up crossing a lot of interesting places. I'll just, list some of them off here. You might say, well, I ask myself, if you see these as significant, what about places where they cross and seemingly nowhere, what's happening there? Well, those might be interesting places too. I don't know. But I'll list some off. One here is, near Las Vegas. And on one side of the cross is Las Vegas here, and the other side is Area 51. And the actual cross here is in this really bright spot. Seems to be in one of these lenticular landforms. Kind of a ridge, very bright spot in the middle there. There's a lot of that around here. If you look at a couple of videos back, we're noticing keeping our eyes peeled. Oh, yeah, that's right on there. So a lot of people would say that this is really handy for, some of the tests and stuff. A lot of these salt flats and things are perfectly flat, and that's the reason there's just a lot of runway. However, it so happens that they also might be natural particle accelerators, if you will. There's another one over here. In the sense that the albedo of the land, that's the reflection of the land, the brightness, reflects microwaves, reflects all sorts of radiation off the surface, and concentrates it possibly in the center, and especially where it's combined with these lenticular land shapes. That's basically like a natural satellite dish. Kind of all over the place here, but that makes, this whole area has a lot of weird activity, and I still, if you really want to bake your noodle, go back through some of that material. But at any rate, I have some more stuff happening. Keep going here. Okay, gotta have my music back on, otherwise my headphones go out. So another crossing point here is the Bighorn Medicine Wheel. I don't want this to go forever, so I don't want to edit a lot. Another crossing point, Serpent Mountains, Brown Mountain Ridge. That's where they say they see a lot of lights, although it doesn't seem especially interesting in terms of this map. Now, one big frequent crossing point I found is very near Houston, which is like entry and exit point for a lot of spacefaring stuff, and again a source of a lot of novelty, and Area 51 over here too, as we saw. But so these are, think in terms of human development. This is a map of human novelty development, population patterns, and geology, and possibly also biological novelty. And nothing conclusive yet. We're just following the data and seeing where it leads and seeing if there are any patterns. And I believe that that's a very frequent method of science. And the science would have to, for this to be science, it would have to contain falsifiability and a testable hypothesis that could be proven wrong or right. And right now, this is just the observational period. We're not hypothesizing really yet, and we're definitely not doing a method, and we're not making any conclusions. But one of these goes right through Cusco. Another goes right. This is a place where there's a lot of these Paracas skull people with the naturally elongated skulls and mummifications. This is a really interesting island sort of location where there's. I just want to see the thing on here. Whatever. Do I get to see it? Yeah, they have a bunch of cactus and stuff, and mummies. So, if you want to go check that out, let's look at some others. Now, these crossing points I'm not completely certain of yet. Like, it's at the point where I go and look at these and see. Well, there are some really interesting structures being discovered in Brazil. Huge occupations that happened there, and really, really interesting agriculture. And this whole area was being used as a roving kind of forest garden by the natives for thousands of years, possibly more than tens of thousands of years over the course of time. If you don't believe the Clovis limit propaganda that they force on you. I hope my history teacher isn't watching. But yeah, that might be. I'll have to look later to see if any of those found settlements kind of coincide with this. But moving on, I developing these crossing points and then sort of coming up, out of my head, different interesting places of interest historically, possibly ufologically, and there are some. I was looking for. I noticed a lot of crossing points here in Sudan, and I was looking for some stuff in Sudan. Now, what I did find, a lot of these old kingdom settlements, a lot of ancient pyramids and temples here. On this trajectory of the Nile, and some of this looks like it could have been an old route of the Nile, but a lot of this looks like insane floodwaters, as we were noticing in the last episode about these really big, long tracks. Some people say this is wind movement. I don't think that's natural wind movement. I mean, like that for that pronounced for such long distances where you can see these tracks, like they're sometimes clearly drifting for miles. It's as if a huge tidal wave pushed in the whole continent here. So there could have been something there. Who knows? Or maybe there's something there in the future. Who knows? It's just interesting. Another place like that is down here in South Africa. Now, like, what the heck happened here? It's like no man's land. Hey, nothing happened here. But that does look interesting. That looks like some kind of major energetic event just sort of wiped everything out here. Either from afar in the form of a tidal wave, massive tidal wave hitting this coast. Just sure looks like that too. And or just a huge thing happened here. Or thinking in fourth dimensionally here doesn't necessarily have to be in the past or the present. Could be in the future. Could be a high concentration of metals. I mean, if you look at the Enumation, the old Mesopotamian stories about supposed gods from Mesopotamia or gods from Nibiru that came here and chose some of these places as mining locations. If you believe any of that stuff, some people think a lot of that is in South Africa, and that there have possibly been ancient mines found by miners down in these areas, and that if it has a seemingly unknown origin, sometimes it's just easier to cover them up. But if you want to go down that rabbit hole, look into lost ancient mines in Africa and Nibiru and stuff. Um, too many rabbit holes to go down all at once. We're trying to take all the rabbit holes at 10,000-foot view. So, some other interesting. Here's a crossing point. This is, and this is the church. The Church of St. George here is one of the alleged sites. Like, according to some people, Graham Hancock at least believes that this is the final resting place of the the Ark of the Covenant is being kept by the Ethiopian church, and sort of under the radar. There's a lot of solid evidence for that. There's a whole Ark-based that sect of the Christian church is very based around that, and there's miniature churches around there where there are copies and replicas of this ark, and it's very highly believed by millions of people that it's there. And another interesting location just happens to be very close to the Great Rift Valley, which is where Lucy was found, and Australopithecus. This is our alleged home, of some of our earliest hominid ancestors. So we're getting lots of things here. Another interesting crossing point. This is Cairo, Egypt, and Giza and the Great Pyramid of Giza and all this. Some interesting crossing points here. I'm looking for the highest density crossing points where not just, if I could take, there's a lot of lines coming off of Hawaii, for example, out there in the Pacific. I could take all of those, and they'll eventually meet at one point on the opposite side of the world. But what I'm interested in is where different points converge naturally from various sources, or volcanoes and other interesting geoanomalies that the ships are going by or looking at and stuff. Whether those are sometimes they're a track along, they'll pick a route that goes across a few of these. And some of these lines are based on deeper things than that. So this I marked here, which is really interesting. This is a crossing point. I'm not even sure if I want to wait for that to render all the way, but it was such a strong, interesting crossing point. I looked closer just as a test to see if there's anything weird that I could see there. And it's like a town. There's a few things happening here, but there's also these earthworks on the side of the hill here that it seems like they're actually pretty massive. Yeah. And they don't seem to have necessarily people living inside them, but they seem to be just a part of the scenery, so to speak. And I wonder if these are old buildings of some kind, or farming pattern. I'm just also interested because it seems like an interesting way to texture the land out here in the desert, where you just take and seclude off a little bit for yourself and your animals and your trees and so forth. Keep the rain, control erosion, control the winds. And so these came up when I was looking at this. And this is also pretty interesting, although I don't know per se, what is modern human or not. These seem to be modern human developments, but these all out here and stuff don't seem to be. They're kind of all over the place. Could be nothing at all. But again, another place here you have Dome of the Rock in Israel, Jerusalem. This is the treasury in Jordan, the site of one of the scenes of an Indiana Jones search for the Holy Grail. Last Crusade. That was the end of that movie, was filmed there. But pretty famous places. Another of these is on Baalbek. Here's Baalbek. This is where there's these giant trilithon stones, these huge, unbelievably massive stones that people don't really know how they were carved, lifted, moved. And there is the Temple of Jupiter, which is a Roman temple built on top of them. It's sort of like just sort of foisted on the top of it, where it's obvious that the platform existed previously. And archaeology is a little fudge. They say that the Romans built it, but if you look at the Roman record, they definitely say they found it. So pretty big mystery there, and a lot of this kind of thing happening around this pretty interesting area where there's a lot of these crossing points and stuff. Again, no conclusions here, but another interesting crossing point here at Karnak. This is where this is the city of, quote unquote, city of the dead, aka I believe Thebes, aka I also think Akhenaten tried to move his operations here when he attempted to overthrow the existing the priest caste and the religious order at the time in Egypt, and bring things back to a different version of Ra. I think it was I want to say Amun Ra instead of Aten Ra. It might have been Aten Ra instead of Amun Ra. I might be messing it up. A different version, which was closer to the rising sun versus the afternoon, I believe. So he was kind of a bit of a cultist in that sense, but a really interesting place. And again, right on a pretty strong crossing. And again, to be fair, what are these out here? I don't know. But out here you have Riyadh, which is a pretty big source of power and innovation in the Middle East. And right in the middle of this big triangle here, it's interesting that it's in the geometric center of this triangle. And that's Mecca. And that's the center of the world for lots of people. Another place, Göbekli Tepe. This is where they found a lot of these ancient ruins. Çatalhöyük, which is an ancient site. These are ancient Neolithic sites. Here we have Mount Olympus, the Parthenon, the Oracle Delphi, all pretty close to lines. Lascaux Cave, which is where we find a lot of these those cave drawings. Those really, really old cave art, I believe, made by Cro-Magnon. And some of these are just rock art sites in various places in Tunisia, Algeria. These just kind of, there's not much known about what's going on in the middle of the Sahara. That, if there are big discoveries happening out here, they're pretty much swept under the sands, if you know what I mean. But there are these outcroppings of rock where there's art, and it depicts these places. It depicts lots of water and animals and stuff. Believe it or not, very shortly ago, and at least within human memory, this was all water and lakes and stuff. It was actually pretty nice. Very different than what it is now. So just looking to see and seeing if anything interesting pops up. Now, this big blue line, you might be asking, what the heck is this? What I did here, and this is where I said that there's some of these lines are drawn on actually interesting geological features that are not just the ship lines or whatever. Here from the Rishat structure, which is the quote-unquote Eye of the Sahara, which some people think might be the ancient location of Atlantis. Again, believe it or not, okay, there's residue found around this that is remnants of lake bed that is also mixed somewhat with salt marsh. And there's the remaining of salt, but there's evidence that it was a riparian ecosystem, and that means like a shallow lake bed area with reeds and stuff like that. So it was freshwater. Now, when they describe Atlantis, they put Atlantis in like a flow of water, and that it had this circular structure and these concentric rings, and this actually has that number of rings And it has a lot of the similar features. Some people would say, well, what's Atlantis doing in the middle of Africa? Well, actually, if this was water at one point, and some argue, Jimmy Corsetti on Bright Insight has argued that this is the magma dome that the Richat structure is kind of cooled off now, but there may be some signs that actually that this whole giant magma bulge under Africa has been bringing Africa up slowly. So, and that one of the ways that might be seen is I found this huge line. It's kind of hard to see when I drew the line, but there we go. If you can see, this is kind of like this very straight ridge that I found, kind of running a line from the Richat, and I drew along that, all the way around the world, and along this, and it falls ball back, as we already saw, and it keeps going and going and going. It goes by Meghalaya. This is a complex of giant rocks and stones, sort of a geoanomalous zone here with some very interesting archaeology happening, some very interesting sacred caves. It's a very big sacred site to a lot of, I think, a couple of different religions. And that keeps going along here, goes right through Papua New Guinea. Now that's a huge source of human, biodiversity and just life biodiversity. It's full of different. You see again these ridges of land that separate species, and there's a very well-known division of land here, where there's a distinct division of sea and land and currents through here, by which on the north west side and on the southwest side, southeast side, you find completely different animals, different plants, all sorts of stuff. So not to get too lost in there, but again, about these points of geological geoanomalous zones that create biodiversity. That goes through New Caledonia, which is the place where there's the really smart crows. Goes right along here. Goes pretty dang close to Easter Island, if not like just spitting distance from Easter Island. And right through, wouldn't you know it, the center of Lake Titicaca, where a legend has that there's more ruins under this, but right around here is the Pumapunku ruins with the H blocks, mummies, all sorts of weirdness in this area. And Nazca is very close to here. As we can see, there's Paracas culture, which there's more Paracas culture down here. So this is a huge area. I think there's overlap. I'm not sure if in time and space between Paracas and Nazca. I'm not sure if those are exactly the same. If Brian Forrester's ever watching this, please correct me, leave me a comment, talk to me on my channel. That'd be awesome. So keeping on going here, that keeps going. Goes through, I don't know what that is. And all the way back around. Cabo Verde. Never heard of it. But so there you have that one. That goes through some interesting stuff, and that's an actual, geoline, that might have resulted from some displacement of the Earth's crust. Now, another one of these interesting geolines is this feature here that goes up, up, up. Interestingly enough, and I don't know the true nature of this looks like a fault line or something. It's a pretty severe fault line. I'm not sure that this is the one that caused the massive Indonesia quake. Indonesia's got lots of quakes. This whole area's got lots of quakes. You can see it's pretty heavy faults. There is a story, I think, about in the Ramayana. There was a road made to um, the island fortress of the Lord Ravana, and that was used by Rama and the Vanara army to get across. And that's what this made me think of. Although it's huge, and if I'm thinking, I've thought that Sri Lanka might be more likely as a location of Ravana as island. But if anybody's more familiar in that lore, let me know. But at any rate, those are just, these are legends, and legends are keys to possibly deep, huge events in the past that are buried. There is, however, a very interesting gravity deformation right here, and this does have a scientific explanation, where right in this spot is one of the last areas that is we can see the remnant of a sea that was between Gondwana and what used to be India. India used to be over here, so when India came and squished up in here, it buried an ocean, a whole ocean, and that is still down there in the crust. And so there's these very tiny, actually very tiny deformations of the Earth's crust that are noticeable in gravity, and it shows up in these. In addition to the gravity anomalies that the normal gravity deformation that we look for with these gravimetric scanners on the ships and so forth. So that's very close to this. That goes up through here, and what do you know? That these cross in Meghalaya, and it goes. Anything else interesting along here? What do you know? Goes pretty close to Houston, and also the LIGO. This is where they measure gravity waves. I don't think necessarily a lot of this has been planned. I attribute, if there is actually anything here, if we're actually accidentally mapping any kind of like higher dimensional or multi-dimensional structure here, this is just, I see this as kind of like maybe a physical or geospatial version of like the Aztec calendar or something like that. And we're just riffing here. This is just interesting observations. Like, whoa, cool, dude, what's that? I don't know what the heck. But it would be interesting if anybody's watching this and you see, these crossing points, and you fish here or you live here or any of these, and just get a hold of me if you've seen or heard or experienced anything out of the ordinary, or if there's really interesting stuff there, or if it's just a cool place to visit. Check it out. There's actually the point to all this is there's really interesting things everywhere, and if anything, this is just a really weird excuse to practice geography, look at different things, and stimulate the brain. Otherwise, this doesn't. This goes right kind of through this very interesting area of cracking and deformation here, where the Earth, not all of this again is. Here's the ship lines, and not all of this is ship lines though. These are very squarish, very fractured, showing a deep kind of crystal habit to the form that the Earth takes and the rock takes when it breaks, as it leads to these other fault locations and stuff. And it might be areas of overlapping scans, but then you have these scans going between them, so it seems like there are features that interest them, and then they go check them out, and then that is kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy where it makes more of these interesting things. Here's a crossing point where this is a very heavy crossing point, and what do you know? There's another one of these interesting lenticular, almost like squarish geoanomalies. Now this isn't exposed to the surface or of the the sky or anything like that. So this is not concentrating Earth energies necessarily. Neutrinos maybe, although they don't bounce off of matter at all, really. So really, in this case, we're talking more about Earth energies, but in terms of Faraday, and everybody that's worked with the different laws of magnetism, if you change the shape of a conductor, you're going to change the shape of the field, and the lines that combine, if you can sort of see them in your mind's eye as these lenticular shapes, warp the land, thus they warp the field, and they can possibly combine in some interesting ways when those field lines cross. Another interesting place that they cross here, this is where we have the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory, and this is where we look for neutrinos, and these are high energy particles that are actually faster than the speed of light. And even though people are still trying to figure out how the heck that works, and yes, I guess the speed of light is not the limit. They don't interact with matter terribly often, but they do once in a while hit an ice molecule or two. So this observatory is actually down here looking for these collisions and making these maps of where they see the particles aren't actually colliding with any detector. You can't build a detector that can detect these things themselves. They're looking for radiation, the same kind of radiation that comes out of nuclear blasts and nuclear plants and fusion and stuff like that. Cherenkov radiation from the ice, very, very small disturbances in the ice that show them these things. And it's just very an interesting coincidence, maybe, that it's on this major crossing point in the middle of Antarctica. A few other crossing points here, but what else is there? Without more data, it's almost impossible to find out. So a lot of this isn't really trackable. But on the flip side, now there was a. It should be noted that in the most recent disclosure project hearing with Stephen Greer, there was a guy that did contracting here and said that he worked on a high-powered ELF, that's extra low frequency facility that was here. That was confidential. His argument was that somehow that was being used to either combine with the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory to possibly detect the locations of nuclear submarines around the world and or communicate with submarines, our submarine fleet around the world. But an interesting thing about ELF is that another location that has ELF, lots of ELF antennas, happens to be HARP, which I don't think they say is not in operation anymore, but yeah, where is it? Yeah, here is HARP. Another seeming close to a crossing point. It seemingly correspondingly in the north. So that's not exactly at the North Pole, so it's hard to argue that that's terribly significant. So that, and again, also technological novelty areas. This one's interesting, and I'm not sure what's happening here, but that would be worth checking into. Another interesting crossing point is this Novosibirsk region of Russia, and this has some interesting. I looked into this, and it seems like it's got it's a source of technological novelty. There's a lot of universities, a lot of artists and music that come out of here. And just nearby here, this is Denisova Cave, where the remains of some Denisovans were discovered, and that's where we have got the genetic evidence for part of our DNA that actually holds a remnant of this species of human, as well as some art and some other artifacts that they made there. I'm wondering if I'm forgetting anything, but here's the following up on a previous video I did. This is the true location of the Baltic Sea anomaly. Not really close to anything. You can't really see much. It's just really a shadow on the bottom of the ocean. And this is the weirder looking thing that we found at Karinkanan-Matala. That's the weird plasmic sort of energy shapes that we found that are just insanely bizarre. And somebody's got to explain that to me. This is where the Hessdalen lights are. Although if you look at it, this sort of makes kind of like a big circular shape here, where it seems like this whole thing is like pushed out from some sort of blast, maybe volcanic or meteorite. Just in that these lakes seem to kind of go this way. You can see some sort of lines of force. And this seems like it's been pushed up here. Stonehenge, right there. And I think I might be out of things to show you, believe it or not. For now, at least. If you stuck with me this long, then you might be weirder than I am. But, again, I don't know what I'm looking at. I might just be chasing ghosts and shadows. I thought about not making this video at all, because I'm just not really that sure about anything here. But I find it interesting. Some of these things just stuck out at me as pretty interesting. Like, for example, like the number of times that these lines went through Bermuda, which was weird. And that wasn't expected. But like Bermuda, and they talk about the Bermuda Triangle, and shipping lanes. That's because there's a lot of shipping that goes through here. To be fair, yes, but why lines that converge there from the other side of the planet too? That have to do with these locations of geological features and stuff. I just don't know. A lot of these meet up, interestingly enough, on just areas of high density. This is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, where there seems to be a lot of really interesting ridging happening. This is, from the drift, the separation of the continents as they're adding more magma from the center and pushing out. So there's scientific explanations for this stuff, but it is just very interesting how it ends up looking, and even naturally revealing a kind of rock-like or crystal-like quality to the actual formation of the Earth, and in a fractal sense. I just find that very interesting. And I, call me crazy, but I just wanted to share and show folks some stuff I found. And if you find this interesting, please give it a like, give the channel a subscribe, share this with somebody, and let me know your feedback. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.